Dr. Allen, thank you very much for sitting down and talking to me.
Sure. My pleasure.
It's been a great conference.
It has been, yeah. Yeah, conferences like this, when they're well run and well done, as this one is, really energize. You go home and you just can hardly wait to do what you were thinking you should maybe try to get done sometime, and then you go to the conference and then you can hardly wait to get home and do those things.
Yeah.
You know, so I always feel really energized. And
yeah, me too.
Yeah,
I think that's a common feeling. What are you spend a lot of time, you guys have a booth here, you spend a lot of time kind of interfacing with your customers, with people. What are you talking to them about? What kind of things are they saying to you, and what are we talking about?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, the business of training in general is pretty challenging. I don't think anybody succeeds at it if they aren't really dedicated and really care. It's a nice business because when you succeed, you feel rewards that you're helping people out, you're helping them achieve more of their potential. If those things weren't important to you, I don't think you'd stay in training very long.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. It's hard work. I think underappreciated much of the time. But I enjoy just being around people who are so dedicated, who are looking for what's that extra little thing that I can do to make a learning experience really work for people, and help them feel not only more competent, but better about their contributions to the organization. Yeah, so I just like being around everybody here who's so fired up about finding a way to do that, even though we know every day there are constraints we wish weren't there. There are objectives that seem like, I don't know, we're ever going to get it done in that short amount of time, you know, or the subject matter, the content material isn't getting pulled together as fast as it should be, or the programming's taking a little longer than we expected, or network's down, or whatever it is, you know. But it's a business that's so multifaceted that it takes it takes a team, like a village, you know. Takes a team of people who really work well with each other toward that common goal.
So you've been doing this a couple years now. You kind of started out on the tools side, creating some great tools.
Yeah, well, yes. In a way, actually, people would be surprised at some of the things I started with. You know, and it was in '68 that I prepared my first application. You know, so that was pretty early on. And I have to admit that one of the first things that intrigued me was learning management. We didn't call it that; we call it CMI, Computer Managed Instruction, at the time. And I had a chance to work on a project that was funded by the National Science Foundation, and it was teaching biology, elementary biology at the college level. And the government had built what was supposed to be the National Demonstration Center for how to use technology in education. And they had film strips, and they had audio that you could, they had individual study carols, and they had phones in there, and you could dial up an audio tape and listen to it on the phone.
Mobile learning?
Pause and back it up. Yeah, it's almost mobile learning. Yeah. And they just had just sort of everything that they could do at the time. Abandoned the idea of having scheduled classes. The center was open 22 hours a day, and you had a study guide. The faculty members were there on staff, and you could go ask them questions. You know, you could form your own little study groups if you wanted. It was very free.
When was this again?
This was in '68.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was just a magnificent failure. It just it just didn't work at all. So the best laid plans of mice and men. Here was something where they wanted to demonstrate to the world, how great American education was, and they had put all of this technology of the time in place, and it was failure. So I was in my graduate program in educational psychology, and I was looking at this, and I thought, well, it's just, if you just think for a minute, you'd realize this wouldn't work. So what do you have to think about? Well, how are we raised? How are we trained? We're usually spoon-fed. You know, there'll be a quiz on Friday. You need to read this chapter by Wednesday. You know, and it's all laid out, and the pacing is there. Everybody's supposed to do what they do. They took all of that away. And they said, your responsibility to learn, and we've got all of these resources, so go do it. And there was a final examination, which was the only scheduled thing, and you had to take that final examination. Well, this learning center sat there totally empty until about a week before the final examination. And then people complained that the center was closed for 2 hours for cleaning a day. You know, 22 hours wasn't enough, and people were standing in the hallway. You know, we're just not used to that.
Yeah.
And the psychology of the learning environment is just absolutely critical. You know, so e-learning can be great, blended learning, asynchronous, all of these things can work, but if you forget about the psychology of how people spend their time, you know, do you spend your time working on things that are really difficult for you to learn, or do you practice those things that you're pretty good at?
Yeah.
Well, people prefer to practice the things that they're really good at, you know?
Yeah.
And yet when we're training, we really sort of need them to focus often on the things that they're not good at, you know? And so my original work was on management of the center, and I wrote programs that we called student-initiated repeatable testing. Now, generally, people don't like tests, right? And so they put them off. And so I'd say, well, this was really crazy. And we did kind of have to sell it a little bit. But we had the idea that there's that big, scary final examination at the end. Let's try to take that scare away, but also use it as a motivation. So what I built was a deal that you could take little quizzes on stuff at any time you wanted to. And you could take them as often as you wanted to, because I had this huge pool of questions. You know, so I didn't care how many times you wanted to take the test. Yeah. And you can request it, and it would come up on the computer. Well, people learn from taking tests what's important. Right. So it was a clue. But because all of the questions kept changing, you couldn't get through the test just by remembering that, you know, it's C in the third question and A on the fourth question or anything like that. You couldn't do that. And people would figure out that the shortest path, the easiest path, was actually to learn the material rather than sit there and take tests all day long. You know, and so they did. And then we said, tell you what, if you show mastery level performance on all these little quizzes, we'll just give you full credit for that, and you can just go on. And if you get through all of the content and show mastery in all this, you don't have to take that final examination, because we'll just give you an A, because you've already got it. Well, then you distributed the time. Everybody started working on it earlier, you know, because they thought, well, if I don't get an A this time, I'm not going to let that stand, and I'm going to go again until I can get it. And that was really the first big project for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's changed in instructional design and learning in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so?
Well, you know, there has been a continuous change, I think. I'm not sure that it's been a cliff or a radical change, but I do know one thing I think that's really important and valuable to focus on, and that's that we really don't care what people know. Training isn't about knowing things, it's about doing things, you know, and we have to make sure that we realize that knowing facts, knowing sequences and so forth are enablers to what's valuable. But the objective is not to make people feel guilty in that I know what I ought to be doing, but I'm not doing that.
Right.
We have to bridge and get them doing, you know, what's more effective, what's more beneficial for them, what's more beneficial for the organization. And so for me, I think in part, there's been a revelation that as an instructional designer, I need to work backwards. So I'd like to partner really closely with clients, and that's why I have small studios in my organization. You know, we have a lot of people, and we could have this big group of instructional designers and this big group of programmers and this big group of writers and so forth, but we don't. We have small teams that really work together. They kind of know what each other is thinking without saying anything.
I'll have to agree with you, because working firsthand with your team, it was exactly that. It was a fantastic small group of people who just the handoffs were so smooth. They, you know, they were like a well-oiled basketball team or something. They knew each other's job well enough, and when it was their turn to take the ball and do it. And so I totally think that you're accomplishing that.
Well, that's good, because what we really want to do is not be focusing on each other as the team, but we want to be focusing on our partner and our client, and we need to really understand what behaviors, what performance is going to make a measurable difference to the organization.
Sure.
And that's where then this new idea for me has come about, and that's that I want to work backwards. And that's, I ask this question of my teams and myself when we're doing design: what is the last thing that you want a trainee doing before you're going to put them on stage, let them go out there and perform? What is the very last thing? Is it answering multiple choice questions? You know, is that going to transfer to the job?
Right. Yeah.
If their job is answering multiple choice questions, then you bet. I don't know many people who have that job, you know. But if it's giving optimum customer service, then I want them practicing customer service to a point that reaches my criteria. And instead of starting where most people do, is way at the beginning about what's fundamental knowledge, what are the terms they need to know, what's the process, and all this kind of stuff. Those things will fall in place, and I don't need to worry about those, not at the beginning anyway. I want to go way to the other end and figure out what would be the last activity that I'd have people performing, and when I saw, you know, Jeff is really good at that, you know, he's ready to go out in the job, then I'll have a really important modular component of my training. And then I ask the question, what will he or she need to be able to do in order to approach and use that module of instruction effectively? And so I work backwards, start from the end. If I don't get all the way to the beginning, I actually don't even worry about that, because most of that basic stuff people can figure out. Yeah. It's the professional level performance that people don't intuit very well, you know. So if I don't have as much money to do a great job of training at every nuance all the way through a program of behavior, which is always the way I think of it, as a program of behavior, then I want to do the most valuable stuff, and that's the end stuff, not the beginning stuff, you know. And you find out that when you do that, you get away from, you know, modules of here are the basic terms you should know, you know, and all of the boring stuff that even if the whole thing is well done, if you start with that boring stuff, people are turned off by the time they get to what would otherwise be interesting to them. But now, you know, they're tired.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we do kind of have a tendency to do that.
We do. And, you know, I used to teach kind of classical instructional design at the university, and I even taught the ADDIE model, which I'm very much opposed to now, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Right. You know, and there are lots of good concepts in it. It's really, really good. But it will tend to have you start at the beginning instead of starting at the end, and I just think it's backwards. You gotta flip it over.
What is ADDIE?
Yeah, what's ADDIE
we'll
spelled backwards? That's a good question. Good question.
I can't do that backwards.
No, either.
So what are you excited about that's happening right now? Is there anything out there that you're doing or that you're seeing other people do that's exciting to you?
For some years, I've had a discussion with my closest friends and colleagues, also dedicated to this field, about what's the impact of tools. You know, some of the skeptics say it doesn't matter how powerful the tool is. Most people don't know how to design an interesting, dynamic, and engaging learning experience anyway. You know, and Authorware was a big deal for me, of course, and I designed that as a tool that kind of overcame, I think, a lot of my personal weaknesses, which is my best ideas usually come late in the process, not at the beginning of the process. You know, I started out with something I think is really good, and I get partway in it, and I think, oh no, this would be better. And then I implement some of what's better, and I think, oh, now I really know what I ought to do.
Right.
You know, and so I needed a tool that allowed me to change things and be able to preserve everything that was still useful. You know, and most tools are pretty good at your first pass, but then they get cumbersome to use to make all these changes and rearrange and things. And so I wanted one that basically didn't penalize me for lack of planning. You know, basically,
yeah.
I'm in the midst of this.
Feature.
Now I know what I want to do. You know, help me get out of this hole that I'm in, or don't let me get in a hole better.
Yeah.
And it really made a big difference. And when the market took to it like it did, you know, I mean, within just a few years, it had like 85% market share, you know, which was astounding. I actually thought that I kind of made the contribution I needed to make, and I can just watch all this wonderful stuff flourish and feel that a little part of that happened because of what I did, you know. Well, the outcomes were very different. Lots more e-learning got built because Authorware made it easier to do. But the quality didn't rise much at all. You know, a little, because it made things like drag and drop that were thought to be really difficult at the time.
Right.
That was pretty easy, you know, and doing a variety of path-based animations and things, pretty easy.
Yeah.
So that really helped. But so the question in my mind is, you know, if we could make it much easier still, would people produce better learning environment, or is it not the tool at all? And I really enjoyed the keynote presentation the other day and this morning as well about play and about learning from the process. And so I thought, well, really what I want in a tool is the opportunity to play with an instructional idea and push it and pull it and turn it upside down and extend it quite a bit. And then the idea of collaborative work is really, really exciting. And that's kind of the new thing, I think, on the block. You always worry, you know, that every few years there's some new phrase that comes out, you know. So for quite a few years we didn't have anything new, so we just changed the term. You know, it was computer-based instruction and computer-assisted instruction, and you know, we went through a long list of three-lettered terms. You know, trying to make it feel fresh and new, but it wasn't.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it was the same stuff. And then Web 2.0, there was kind of a question in my mind about, is this really new, or is this just another name? But the really interesting opportunity to me now is if you make the tools easy enough to use, it widens the scope of who can get involved. And so now you can have people who are executing best practices in the corporation sharing, you know, and they may not be instructional designers, but they can build the basis of an interaction or an experience that says, here's how I do it. And then it can be picked up by an instructional designer and, you know, given some space practice or, you know, applying some of the good techniques we know they use and be made into something really powerful at a fraction of the cost. So now you can start to think of an organization made up of that we're all learners and we're all teachers. Yeah. And we're all going to help each other. Yeah. And I think that's new. I think that's really new. It scares people, I think, because there's less authority. It's not so much as this is the way we're doing it because I said so. It's more this is the way we're going to do it because we all agree this works best. Yeah. You know, so that's kind of new. I think maybe harder for my generation than for the younger generation.
Yeah, and it's something that depending on where you sit, it's easier or harder to implement or trust.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
You know, a matter of perspective.
So that's got me interested in tools again. Yeah. So now I'm.
You're dabbling, aren't you?
I am. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I am. Yeah. I've been dabbling with tools in my head for a long time. Yeah. Long time. And then about a year ago, the chief engineer of Authorware, who I think he was 33 when he retired, a multimillionaire and stuff, you know, he worked on it. He's been doing philanthropic work and community service work and stuff all these years. He's just a really great guy with a big heart. He's a physicist, just unbelievably smart. He called me up coincidentally, when I was really thinking about this about a year ago, and he said, "Say, would you like to take on the challenge again?" And boy, that was enough for me. I said, boy, would I ever, you think we got any new ideas? He said, well, I know you do. Because you always had too many ideas, which is true. I was thinking about. And he said, I'm really intrigued that we could maybe do something kind of radically new with the technology. So he and I have been dabbling in this for about a year and been doing some experiments where actually addressing one of my dreams. And one of my dreams is I'd like a tool that allows me to teach the computer to teach. I just want to kind of show the computer how to do it. I don't want to write something in a foreign language, and that's what I think of as programming languages being.
Yeah.
Even though it's true that I loved programming back years ago, I thought it was fun. For me, it was like a crossword puzzle for other people. I just love programming and the challenge of it. But we got to remember that that's a means to an end for most people,
right.
and I want to make it as very simple as possible. So I've often thought that I want to be able to start the ball rolling down the hill. That is, I want to start an instructional program out, and probably what it does is it starts presenting information to me, and I want to be able to stop it and say, no, don't do that. Ask me this question first, and so they ask me this question, and I may give it an answer, and even if it just defaults to saying everything I answer to my first questions is the correct answer. I'm fine with that. I'll answer something that might say very good, and I'll say, oh no, that wasn't very good, and I want to correct it, and then I'll give it that answer again and let it correct me, and I think that's pretty good. I'll give it another answer. Well, I might go back to saying, yes, that's very good. No, it isn't very good. And so I can just I could just sort of think, I don't know if this will work for most people or not, but I can just sort of think that I'm creating a mannequin in the classroom, and I'm just teaching that mannequin to behave like a really, really good teacher. So I've got the computer behind the screen. I want to just teach it to behave like a really, really good teacher. And I don't want to write a program in a foreign language. I don't want to have to go through a whole bunch of really complicated things. And if I change my mind, I want to change it basically while the program's running. I want to just say, no, do this now. I want to go back to the beginning. I don't want to take it apart and try to find where that gear is, If it's up on the screen and it's the wrong thing, I want to change it now. Yeah. And so that's what we've been playing around with, and it's just radically different. And in our experiments right now, the speed and the productivity is just mind-boggling. Yeah. And what that means is that we play with more and more instructional design ideas in the same amount of time. In fact, what we can do is we can cut the overall time in less than half and still have more time to explore alternative instructional design ideas than we had before.
Yeah.
And so,
focus on what we really should be focused on.
Yeah. Right. And then allow authors and subject matter experts and graphic designers and writers, wherever they are around the world, to collaborate, as if they were all sitting looking at the screen in the same room. And students as well, have them talking to each other, have them talking to the people who designed the course. If they see something on there that, boy, that seems complicated to me, I always understood it much more simply as, well, throw that in to the mix. It needs to be filtered, of course. I'm not so sure whether, as one of our speakers said the other day, whether we need to be so concerned about letting them talk to other learners anyway. Right. As long as it's identified that it's a learner, it doesn't necessarily make it officially T-Mobile. Right. It's Don is saying that.
Right.
And people can talk to Don, and eventually we're all kind of agreeing that this would be better. Well, if our instructional designers are listening to that, watching, participating, eventually say, yeah, I think we ought to change this, and then they can make official change to it. I think people will get much more involved in learning and training.
Oh, yeah.
you know, and it won't be that long. I gotta go to training. I mean, the only reason you get generally an oh, I gotta go, don't get an oh, I got to training is that I get to go to training because today is an unusual day. I don't have to do the stuff I normally have to do today because I'm doing training, you know, and they usually give us good donuts and stuff,
Right.
you know. But it shouldn't be like that. It should be at home. You know, I get to work some training in every day because it makes me enjoy my work better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think that's too idealistic. I really
I don't think it is.
But it isn't very often realized.
Yeah, I think that connection back with our customer, our learners is one that it's taken a long time to really figure out how it's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit of that fear, I think. Oh, they're going to say they don't like it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's what we
Yeah.
really want as instructional designers. We want that because how can
Yeah.
we give them what they want?
Yeah.
You know, we don't listen to them. So.
One of the models that we use in e-learning quite often is, especially in sales training, is that we'll have a discourse with them so that we can kind of teach people, here's the way you initially establish the relationship, here's the way you make sure that you're listening to what their needs are, not assuming you know what the needs are, and you're not lecturing, you know, a potential buyer about what their needs ought to be. You know, you try to get this all right, and you have that discourse, but then when you layer on top of this an opportunity to see a little thought bubble from the person you're talking to, and the person is saying, well, yeah, John, that's a good point, but the little thought bubble says, I got to get this guy out of my office as soon as possible because this is really a waste of time and he doesn't get it, you know. So we try to show that, you know, people will be polite, but it doesn't mean that they're buying,
Right.
you know. And so there's little thought bubbles in there. Well, we need to find out what our learners are actually thinking. They need to feel comfortable talking to us about it, and if they're really bored with something, they're really confused, if their needs aren't being met, and so forth, we ought to consider that gold. You know, if you will tell us
Good
that,
information.
that is really good information. You know, and let us work on that, and especially if they'll respond to the question, what would make it better in your view? You know.
Yeah.
You know, lots of times, I always say that, you know, the best instructional designer is a recent learner. That's somebody who's had the aha experiences. They remember not knowing and what happened to make sense for them and moved them forward. And so then I can build on that because they're probably not alone. That aha experience probably shared by a lot of other people, you know, and if I can get a nice collection of those together, why, then I'll have a good idea.
Back to kids, that's what they do. They learn it and then they
Yeah.
teach their friends what they just learned, all excited. You know,
Yeah.
I notice with my boys, it's like my older boy learns something right away. Good or bad, he teaches it to my younger one, and it's exciting, and he's proud of that.
That's
he feels
right.
connected with it. So.
Yeah, adults are really big kids, and I mean, there's a notion about adult learning being significantly different, and it's really not. You know, I mean, there are some things adults won't put up with that kids will because they're used to being dominated
Right.
all of their lives, being told what to do. You know, we adults don't particularly like that. You know, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be good for us to be told what to do, but we don't like that.
Right.
So we respond negatively. But in terms of the, you know, the brain functioning and the learning process, you know, we're pretty much big kids.
Yeah.
You know, so we need to be curious. We need to take things apart to understand how they work, put them back together again right, put them together again wrong, you know, find out what the consequences are, and we need to practice, you know, almost everything. We need to practice. I think that's one of the big faults of most e-learning and blended and other solutions, but in particular e-learning, where you have a technology that is infinitely patient and can help you decide how much practice you need, because you might not need nearly as much as I do, you know, and so the program can be watching your proficiency and saying, you know, you practiced enough, and you haven't practiced enough, and keep coming up with it. And yet, in so many designs, there's just not nearly enough practice. Just not nearly.
Give you it once and then test you on
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Isn't that just ironic?
It is. It is.
I really don't get that. I'm still trying to figure out what's the root of this
Do you-
problem.
I mean, I think sometimes we try and teach too much. We have a course and we're trying to fire hose them with with every little tidbit of information. And do we maybe need to whittle that back and make 2 courses or 3
Almost
courses?
always.
You know, just smaller bits of information. Sometimes just in time.
I think that would be the #1 complaint if I asked my instructional designer is what prevents you from doing what you think you really ought to do. They say it's too much content right away. That they're forced to present, if you will,
We're not going to
distribute
fingers at this
too
time.
much content, right? That's why I'm going to go back to, I like to do it backwards,
Right.
you know, and if I run out of time and money before I've covered all of the content, I at least want to cover the most important content.
Yeah.
And that's the content that comes toward the end, you know. And if people are motivated, they'll learn, but kind of regardless of how difficult you make it for them, you know. But
Some
when,
people will.
right, they will. But when people aren't motivated, they'll stop way too soon before they get to proficiency. And so you got to work on that proficiency level stuff.
You think sometimes identifying really what we want them to learn is a problem?
Yes, well, you know, academics and, academic approaches and, you know, all the things that we've been taught about writing instructional objectives and hierarchical analysis of content and so forth, all starts to point us to working on the wrong stuff. You know, if I'm in training to become a courtroom lawyer, and the first class I take is about the history of jurisprudence. What? I didn't want to be a historian. I'm not going to teach history. Now, it could very well be that what you learn in that course is critical to your performance in the courtroom. But you don't understand the relevance of that if somebody just starts. Then you're going on this, trust me, someday you'll be glad you know this stuff. This is really bad motivator.
Something we say to our kids.
That's right.
Trust me someday.
That's right. We do. And I think that's usually because it's too hard for us to figure out a way to explain why this is important.
Right.
You know, so we just shortcut and say, I'm not going to answer that question, but I'm right.
Right.
This is really important. You know, so it's much better to throw people into a situation where they have to perform, even if they are not in any way reasonably expected to be competent there. Throw them into that situation, the situation that they want to perform well in, and they can't. Well, realizing that they can't is a really good thing. You know, we've done a lot of work for many different companies on training managers to handle sexual harassment situations, and in many companies, if you ask managers if they need training on this topic, they'll say, "Oh no, heavens no. I'm sensitive to those kinds of issues. If something comes up, I'll know how to handle it." Well, in most cases, they're completely wrong about that. These are difficult situations to handle. It's very easy to make the situation worse, you know. And so, trust me, someday you'll need to know this just doesn't work but what does work is to put them in kind of a simulated situation where your corporate attorney is summoning you to her office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and asking you to please bring all the information you have on your relationship with employee, XYZ, because that employee has filed a complaint and we need to know how you've handled these particular situations. Your anxiety, just even if you just read this scenario knowing that you'll never happen to you, your anxiety goes up right away about what was I supposed to be doing? Did I do something wrong? Right. What will I say?
Yeah.
And so, in fact, that's what we've done for a number of our clients in this area. Is we started out with a simulated email, as real as it can look on your screen.
I saw that. And
did you see it?
I did see it. It's fantastic. Yeah. And I also like the terrorist one. That's a fantastic simulation.
Yeah.
Again, you're putting people in the actual situation right away, and then giving them the information that they need. Maybe not always obvious. They have to observe and kind of react within that environment. So, yeah, I really like that approach.
Training is always intended to be helpful, but it isn't always perceived as that. And so it's nice to kind of prove your case as a trainer. And that's put somebody in a situation where they may think they could perform well, doesn't matter, but where they realize that they can't, and then you get to kind of wave a flag and say, over here, I can help you. If you'd like some help, I can help you. You know, you're friends right away.
Yeah. It's a good thing to be. It really is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I've really enjoyed reading some of your books and hope to read a few more.
Yeah.
And keep cranking them out. Well, I thank you for sharing with us some of the lessons that you've learned, and it's really important to have people like you in our industry and helping us figure some of these out, because we can't all do it ourselves. That's why we come to these places, and hopefully you listen to great speakers.
I'm just a sponge. I come and listen and try to pull
Well,
it all
we're all the
together
same,
and
then, I guess.
try to see patterns. That's
Yeah,
all.
exactly.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you.